Welcome to Getting Ghosted. This is an Intuitive Soul Collective podcast, and I'm your host, Allie Horner. Let's get into it. One of the first questions I was getting from people from my TikTok lives and previous clients I've worked with, as well as from the question form that I put on my website, was how did you know that you were a psychic or a medium, and what has it been like for you being out of the spiritual closet, as we would say, as a medium, and how has that affected my life? I will bring on some other friends to share their stories over time, but today I thought I would share a little bit of my own in that respect. So for me, I didn't know that I was a psychic or a medium. I didn't have those terms to put around the things that I was experiencing because no one in my life was talking about intuition or psychic ability or talking about speaking to the other side. I remember very few times of, my aunts and mom and grandma, crowded around the kitchen table and just kind of whispering of like feeling the presence of someone after they passed. But there was really no terminology put around it, like psychic or medium or being able to speak to the other side or anything like that, really. So it wasn't something that I was like exposed to much. I really only saw it in scary movies, and I was obsessed with scary movies and was always really drawn to TV shows and stuff like the show Medium when I was growing up was on, and the show Psych, which is much more quirky and funny, and it was on USA. It's still one of my favorite shows of all time. It's like a comfort show for me. But I was always really into, folklore and supernatural stuff, but I wasn't thinking about it like, oh, this is like me and this is what I experience and this is what I'm going through. I just thought it was neat. But I didn't think that it was something that I was capable of doing or that I was doing. After I went through my kind of reawakening, it was a very, very sudden overnight. The door to the other side just swung open really quickly type thing for me. Just about, I would say almost 10 years ago or around 10 years ago. And when that happened, I began to really recognize what was going on very, very quickly. And I took in as much information as I could because I wanted to understand what was going on, even though I knew in my gut what was going on. And I was getting messages from the other side very, very quickly. And so I started to Google around and look around. And the more that I learned about what it meant to be connecting to the other side, the more and how that happened for other psychics and mediums, the more I recognized that had been happening to me throughout my life on and off. And I had all of these, it was almost like repressed memories that came back that I started remembering. And all of these memories just kind of strung themselves together. And I started to remember like, oh my gosh, I really have had intuitions for a long time. That's what was happening to me. That's what was going on. I wasn't just sensitive. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just having anxiety. I was picking up on this energy and I was picking up on other people's feelings. And I was, the reason I would have these crazy, weird things popping in my head was because someone from the other side was trying to show me something or give me a message. And so, and I'm very, very clairvoyant, which means that I can see the other side, and a lot of things happen for me in my mind. So in my third eye, and one of the big ways I work is I particularly see visions, and will see, and the visions can be precognizant. They can be about someone's past or of a memory of something for someone specifically. And they can be things that someone who has crossed will show me happened in their life, or things that they are even doing or on the other side, or things that they're doing to try to visit their loved ones, for example. But I'll often see these clips of memories or events. And I remember really specifically one time when I think I was in high school, and I kept getting these flashes over and over in my brain of a car accident. And I was very, very well aware that there were two men that had passed in it, and one in particular, and the other one passed shortly after. And it was over and over and over, but I had no idea who they were. And I had no idea why that was in my mind. I just thought like, I just have an active imagination and this is how I am. But it was almost like in the early morning, and I'm still this way to this day. In the early morning, when my intuition is the clearest, I would have these full blown, it was almost like I was watching a movie, but I was experiencing it very viscerally. And, that is one example of a time where I was picking up on someone on the other side showing me the way that they had passed. But at the time, I didn't understand that that's what was happening. So there was no part of me that was, and the internet was not a huge thing back then. It was like kind of still just getting started because I'm old. And so it wasn't like, oh, you can just go Google that and look these people up or figure this out. But I came to find out pretty shortly after that and came into contact with someone and they started talking to me about how, oh yeah, I had, these two people that are in my family, yada, yada. And they passed in a car accident not long ago. And one passed literally in the accident, was thrown from the car. And the other one was hospitalized and passed, very shortly after that. And it was just devastating because they were twins. And I said, were they teenagers? And I started describing them and she was like, how did you know that? And I just like was dumbfounded. And I remember getting that creepy crawly like chills feeling. I also knew it was okay. But at the same time, I was kind of spooked. Like I didn't really understand why I had seen what I had seen. And again, I just pushed this aside and I tried not to think about it much. And at the time I was like heading into college and about to go into college. And I remember just like pushing it to the side and not talking about it anymore and just kind of being like, whatever, so after my awakening, memories like that of little things like that. And all these times I'd picked up on things and then they happened, or I'd picked up on someone's feelings and just knew that they were lying about something, or knew that they were, hiding how they felt, or, they were really angry, but they were brushing it off or whatever. Some of that stuff is just not necessarily intuition. It's just being very receptive and observant of others. But there were certain things where it was like very, very precognizant, future predicting type of things, where it was like there was no logical way for me to know those things. And so I started to have a lot of memories of things that had happened to me in the past, and or I should say happened for me in the past, and all the ways that my gifts had been working the whole time. And I didn't know, I had no idea that that's what was going on. And so that is one of the ways that I knew I was a psychic or a medium. And then on top of that, it was almost unmistakable. Like, the visits from the other side, I would get these messages, again, visions, visitations, smells. They would show me signs, symbols, memories, talk to me very clairaudiently, where I could have a full-blown conversation with the person on the other side. And then soon enough, I would get in contact with one of their loved ones here, and they would validate literally everything the person from the other side had said. The first couple of times I actually had a conversation with someone here and told them like, well, here's what I'm hearing from your dad or your loved one. I almost expected to get everything wrong. Like there was a part of me that was like, I know that this is real. And at the same time, I thought they're going to say I'm crazy and none of this makes sense and yada, yada. And I kind of thought I'll just go about my merry way. But it would be embarrassing, but I'd get over it. Wouldn't you know it, everyone validated every single thing I picked up, and they were like, how do you know that? Like there's like, it just was like these little details of things where it was like, there was no way I could have known. And often people would even tell me it's so wild because you're even speaking the way they would have spoken. Like you're phrasing things the same. Like he used to say things exactly like that. Like, or my dad used to talk just like that. Or that's exactly something he would have said. How would you have known? And so I noticed that was happening because I was doing something called lucid or clear conduit channeling. And it's more so where that spirit or person, you stop having to listen back and forth to what they're saying and then repeating it or talking to them almost like in a conversation. And it's more like they speak through you. It's not a trance channel or possession or anything like that. It's more like they kind of just like, it creates a little bit more of a flow of energy so that the conversation can be more seamless for the person in front of you, but you're still completely present and have full control and know what's happening. So it's not at all like a possessive type of thing. It just is much more of a flow state type of thing, I would say. And so, I ended up getting so much more validation, and I also started to track my intuitions a lot. Like I wrote everything down. I was auto writing. I was scribbling down messages and visions and intuitions I got and making predictions and asking for little clues from my guides and writing down any little thing. And they taught me really from the beginning, because I really learned a lot of this from my spiritual team on the other side. They taught me to track everything. Like they were like, write all of it down. Write it all down, put it in notebooks. And they said, one of the key things is don't try to interpret or figure out why you're getting what you're getting in terms of signs, symbols, songs, phrases, pieces of information, references to places, but, or certain pieces of the puzzle, but not others. They said, don't try to make them fit in a certain way. So this was a huge lesson for me. And they would say, just literally write down, if you hear a name, if you hear this, if you hear that, or you see that, just write it down plain as day with no interpretation on what it might be or how it might fit or what it might mean, because that was one of the big learning curves. And I found that with a lot of psychics and mediums, they're over interpreting. And so that they might try to make things fit into a puzzle in a way that they don't fit. Like the piece is there, it's meant to be there, but it doesn't fit with the other pieces they're trying to connect to it. So it's a very important lesson I learned very, very quickly. And one of the best examples of that was, for example, a while back, they were giving me two names, and one was Jack, and one was, but they were saying Jax, like Jax, and then the other was John. Okay. And I, of course, thought they're referencing two people, and they said, you need to go to this town, and you're going to see Jax or Jack and John. And I was like, oh, okay. And in my brain, I immediately went, yeah, okay, I'm going to look around and see if I hear the names, Jax and John, and, meet them, or if I end up bumping into some new people. So I go to this town, and I'm just kind of like following the directive. I had extra time that day. I was walking around, and I didn't end up talking to anyone. But as I was walking down the main, it's kind of like a pedestrian mall type of street with a bunch of shops and stores and restaurants and bars and stuff like that, I looked up, and right there, almost like within the same, I would say, couple restaurants, there's a shop called, I think it's called John Atencio. It's a jewelry shop, I believe. And then right near that was a restaurant called Jax, Jax. And the second I spotted them both, I heard, see, we told you you'd see John and Jax. And I went, oh, you were referencing the names as part of a location, not people. And my guide said, let that be a lesson on creating an interpretation or a false narrative. And they said humans do it all the time in many contexts. And I thought to myself, ain't that the truth? That's like one of the basic things you learn in like Psych 101, is that everyone has their own version of events and their own interpretation or, translation of things, and that people can only ever see things through their own lens of perspective. And so it's the same thing when you are picking up things from the other side. You might get signs and symbols, but they don't necessarily always mean what you think they mean. So you're really just supposed to repeat them to the sitter, or which is the person receiving your reading, and or just write them down in your notebook. Trust the other person to know what they mean now or in the future. Because sometimes things make sense in the future and not in the moment. Or, write it down in your notebook exactly as you saw it or received it, and don't try to figure anything out about it at that time. It's really difficult not to, but it's best to just write it down and let it go. So that was a lot of like how I started to figure things out and how I started to practice and refine what was going on for me, because I realized, wow, I really am receiving a lot of information. I'm receiving a lot of messages from the other side. I'm receiving tons of intuitions, but I had to sort out what was what was just my thoughts versus like intuitions and messages. And I will say thoughts versus intuitions and messages from the other side, they all feel very different. And they have a very different energy, texture, quality to them. And thoughts can be a little bit more anxiety filled, or they feel a little bit denser because it's your brain just going. But when you're using intuition, it feels a lot clearer and lighter. I always say intuition is just information. It's neutral. How you respond to it is not. And so you can have thoughts responding to an intuition or a spiritual message, but it's not necessarily always that you need to have that emotional response. So like two people could get the same message from the other side and have completely different interpretations and emotional reactions to it, right? So it's important to remember the intuition or the message itself is usually neutral, but the response and your thoughts will never be neutral. They always have some sort of emotional charge because they always come from somewhere that's more of an emotional quality. So there were like just a lot of things that I had to learn in the beginning. Something else that people tend to ask me a lot is, so how much time did it take for you to develop this, and how did you start to tell people about your ability? So in terms of development, it didn't take time at all because I started to recognize just that it had been there. So for me, it was more of a recognition of it. It wasn't so much about it needing to take time to develop it because it was already there. It was already coming through. It was just that I needed to recognize that it was already happening. And that's why I tell people to read other people's stories, like all the time, as much as you can. Read. Listen to other psychics and medium stories, read books about angels, I have like a chicken soup for the soul, and it's about dreams and intuitions. You will see just how often and how normal it is to get intuitions and messages, premonitions, little inklings, little feelings and nudges. You will see just all the ways that people connect to the other side and how their mediumship works. Read different books by different mediums and psychics and channelers. You'll start to understand and recognize, like, wow, some of this has happened to me. And that was like a big part of it for me, was I just had to recognize that it was already going on. It wasn't about me having to develop it. I did have to develop my trust in it though. And that's where I mentioned before, practicing doing readings and starting to get comfy with putting myself out there and, keeping track of my journal, going back, referencing things, looking at how many predictions and messages had come true, seeing the validation and form, all of that was really important. So it was more about developing my trust muscle. And, one of my buddies on the other side always says, trust is a muscle. It works if you work it, there isn't going to be like a spontaneous ability to trust. You can have your knowing, but trusting your knowing is a whole other matter. And he always says, to err is human. So it's not something where we're always going to 110% always trust ourselves, but it does get stronger and clearer. And I will say I have a lot more trust in my ability and in myself and what I pick up now than I did in the past. I will say though, to be honest, I do use my ability literally every day. I auto write every day and or go for walks and do some sort of like walking or sitting down meditation. I do spend time connecting with my guides literally every day and connecting with the other side. I do readings. I would say 5 days a week on average. I do take time off and take little vacations and stuff like that. And, when I get sick, I'll take a little bit of time and space away. But I do readings pretty much almost every day at times. And so I'm connecting to the other side really, really regularly. And I think that's part of why this trust muscle for me has grown so strong. Again, it's not perfect. I do have times where I still doubt or question myself, especially with things I pick up about my own life and things that take so long to come true. Like, gosh, some predictions take like 5, 6, 7 years. It's crazy. And so you're just really waiting on those ones, but I do have, it has taken a lot of time to get to that place. But there is so much more to it. And I think one of the things for me, like I said, is that I'm just using it every single day in big ways and in little ways. So one of the things I love to do, and one of the things that we'll be talking about in my upcoming course and my intuitive journals that I'm developing, is how to run intuitive experiments and kind of make it into a game so that you can develop it to help it be stronger and just use it in everyday life. So it kind of becomes a way of life versus some hippy-dippy spiritual out there thing. No, intuition's a really natural thing. It's really, you're meant to work with your intuition. It is an innate skill. It's part of it. There's a huge physiological component and it's natural. It's what allows you to read the landscape and, to see what's coming and or to feel prepared and to have readiness for things. There's intuition that can help you predict, and there's intuition that reads the moment. And so it's really important to just know that this isn't weird at all. And so for me, I do a lot of like really just everyday stuff. So it hasn't been a matter of time. It's more that I just keep using that muscle. And so at this point, I'm basically like running, I've always known like this is going to be the long term for me. Now, as to the matter of how do I talk to people about it? That's always a big question for people who are starting to, that I'm working with, who are developing the ability or who are going through their spiritual awakenings, and they're starting to, know things and sense things and see things and hear things. And they're having that connection to the other side that feels so beautiful and to them and brings them so much peace or so much enjoyment or excitement. One of the things that they really struggle with is, how do I tell my spouse, or how do I talk to my family about this? And how do I know who I can share this with? Especially, around core relationships, if they know that their family, doesn't, I had a family that did not talk about this stuff. Like this, again, this was not a thing growing up. So I wasn't really, sure about it, but I was really excited when I first got started. And I had to learn a really hard lesson of, not everyone's going to be open. Not everyone's going to be interested. Not everyone's going to be excited. In fact, some people are going to be pretty damn scared of your ability. But I will say, what I've seen with the larger collective awakening and what's happening, through TikTok and Instagram and on YouTube is there are far more people that are comfortable with this than we think. And there are far more people that are having experiences that are just waiting for someone to start talking about it first so they can go, oh my God, really? Me too. And so I've been finding over time that, for me, especially, with just meeting people around and learning how to talk to people about it, I've learned to really, again, use my intuition to gauge, whether I feel a core yes or a gut no when I'm talking to someone, in knowing how much detail I should give when they ask what I do for work or how I should phrase it and what I should, speak on it or not. With certain people, if I can tell that they're really not going to be open to hearing like, yeah, I'm a full-time psychic medium. I do channelings and I do all this stuff. If I can tell they're not going to be open to it, it's almost like something inside me will literally just, instead of spitting the words out that I'm a psychic medium, it'll go, oh yeah, I do some consulting and coaching. And I just leave it at that. Usually when you tell someone you're a consultant, they don't ask questions. So that is that's a good workaround for me personally. You can always think about what might feel comfortable for you. But I can usually gauge if someone's going to be more open to it or more aware, more interested and more excited. And I've noticed I tend to draw in people like that or be drawn to them. And so it's kind of like, just a way for me to make sure I continue to expand my friendships and my community to find people who are really gonna get it. And I will say the ability has really helped me kind of suss out, who is not really going to be in that camp in terms of just, they're not open to it or they're not interested or they're pretty skeptical. I don't really choose to I understand everyone can have their own points of view, but I'm really not looking for any sort of friendships, relationships, anything with people who don't want me to be who I am. I just spent too much of my life living in that space of trying to be someone, trying to fit everyone else's ideas of what I was supposed to be doing and being on the quote unquote right path and being the right person and being this specific type of, girl and yada yada. And trying to take on the traits that other people wanted me to take on. I'm just not willing to do that anymore. Like if there's any one thing I've learned from the other side, it's life's too short. And most of them, one thing they always say is when we were alive, we would have wanted to be ourselves more authentically and more fully, because that's how you really embody your full soul essence on earth. I mean, everyone has soul, right? And at the end of the day, we're all like one giant, beautiful, like collected soul. But in terms of our individual expression on earth, the way that you get closest to for lack of a better way of saying it, but creating heaven on earth is to allow the purest, most authentic part of your soul in any given moment. And so when it comes to being myself around people, I tend to not really gravitate toward people who I know are not going to want me to be that self, because just hearing about what I do causes some sort of upset, trigger, or cognitive dissonance for them, where they can't accept that how I operate might actually be a real thing. And they may also have their own real experiences outside of that, and so for me, I will say I surround myself around people who are much more open to it. It's not all I talk about. I do have like my everyday life. I have my child, I have other activities I love to do. I love to go hiking and running, and I ski, and I'm very much like, I have like my fun stuff and crafts and things that my son and I love to build and paint and create here. I love to read. I have my friends that I love to socialize with. I love to go do my work at coffee shops and stuff. I do quite a bit of, like I said, my psychic medium and creative work, which I really enjoy. But I'm not necessarily like, you know, talking about this stuff all day long. However, it is my bread and butter, and it is how I operate. I am an intuitive person. I do have connection with the other side, even if I wasn't, doing it professionally. It would be there. So it's something where I'm like, I'm not really willing to have relationships or friendships with really anyone at this point in time who can't just at least be accepting of who I am and how I operate. And I give other people that same acceptance, so I do expect it in return. And if it's not there, then it's like, well, I guess that person's just not really meant to be in my life. And that's fine. Sometimes two people aren't meant to be a good fit, So yeah, in terms of that type of like discussion with others, I don't always feel like I have to lay it on the table. I also don't always feel like I need to, be all front and center with it or that I need to go into detail with it. And then other times I'll get a really strong sense of like, I can tell this person, and it always ends up being a full blown, really fun conversation with them. And they're sharing all these stories and asking all these questions. And they're like, I think I've had that happen too. And I'm like, I'm sure you have. So yeah, it's definitely something where it can be really fun. And it's definitely something, where over time, the more you use your intuition and your spidey senses, or listen to your inner guidance, you'll know whether or not each person is the right person to tell. Some people are asking me, how do you deal with this with a corporate job? Well, the answer is I don't have a corporate job. I used to work in the corporate world. And I worked in marketing for a really long time. From the time I graduated college, and I was in marketing for about 8 or 9 years. And, I worked in-house. I worked for creative agencies. I worked in a corporate environment. And one thing I will say is, when I was working, I remember having really strong intuitions about certain things, but not being aware that I was having intuitions. I just knew what I knew, and I didn't know how I knew it. And I noticed that when I was in those worlds, a lot of people didn't really want to listen. I didn't like the bureaucracy. I didn't like, there were a lot of things. It wasn't even just that. It was like that I couldn't really follow my sixth sense on things a lot. And so I didn't really have as much experience having to share, I'm a psychic or a medium with corporate people at that point in time and worry about it affecting a job. Because by the time I had my reawakening, I had already left that job. That was the last corporate job I'd had. But I did have really strong feelings and hunches and nudges about certain things, and they were always right. But so people would say stuff to me like, oh, you totally said that was going to happen, didn't you? And I was like, yeah, a couple months ago, or yeah, just in the last meeting. Or like, oh, like you always seem to like bring something up and then it comes true, or it ends up making sense. And I was like, yeah, so. But I didn't really get it. I didn't know that was intuition. I didn't have a word for it. It just kind of became known in certain environments that I worked in that I kind of operated like that. So I will say that. And I don't want to give too much because I don't want to talk about any specific people or teams or anything like that. I just don't think that that's fair. But yeah, it was definitely something where I found that when I, because of other people's directives or deadlines or what they wanted or what they felt, when I couldn't lean with my intuition or my inner knowing, it was kind of a struggle for me. And the more I looked at certain patterning throughout my life, I realized that had been going on for a really long time. Anytime I couldn't listen to myself, it felt like I was like swimming upriver or trying to walk through a brick wall, and it was exhausting, and I would get sick and sad because I was literally pushing against what I knew and what was right for me. And so I'm very passionate about people and myself and everyone moving in the direction of where their soul needs them to go, even if it doesn't make sense to themselves in the moment or even to other people. It doesn't have to. Like, that's one of the things I've learned about intuition that's been so fun is it often defies logic. And the more you use it, it feels more logical to use it. And it doesn't feel so strange or so foreign. It's also going to break you free from all of the things that you thought you were supposed to be and do and have, but in a really good way. it's going to feel much more like you are rolling down the river. You know what I mean? Like you finally said, enough is enough. I'm not swimming upstream anymore. I'm not fighting the current. I'm just hopping in the raft and I'm going to let myself just lazy river it. And you start to finally have a lot more fun with life. It's kind of like you put those sunnies on and you just get to float and paddle down the river, and you get to where you need to go and where you want to go in life a lot faster, because in essence, it's like you're working with the flow of life, with the flow of the universe, and with your soul's ideal trajectory, rather than trying to push against it to fulfill some sort of plan or path that your ego or someone else's ego thinks is right, but ultimately isn't. And so that's been a huge theme throughout my life. And that's part of why I wanted to do the work that I did. And part of, when I left corporate, I wasn't planning on doing this work initially. It just came about very quickly within a year after that. But it's very much something where when I reflected, I realized how prevalent this pattern had been throughout my life, and how often I'd had many, many opportunities to learn about it and to learn what it means to really be connected to your inner voice and to who you really truly are. Well, that's it for today's episode. I wanted to mention really quickly, I also have my Patreon membership opening now. The link should be in the show notes and in my bio on TikTok. It is a really fun community with different levels of membership. So if you want just a taste and behind the scenes episodes, extra little Q&As from the Patreon, or from the podcast, there's a Patreon group for that. And there are also upper levels that are more for people who want to learn more about intuition, want to have intuitive games to practice, and even a group for people who are a little more experienced and want to practice more channeling and learn how to tune and tap in and turn on their abilities on a higher level with their guides so that they can bring their bigger vision to life. So there's something in there for everyone, no matter how experienced you are with intuition, mediumship, psychic ability. Like I said, there are 2 Patreon groups that are more for just learning and consuming information, sharing stories, talking about synchronicities, finding some fun friends to chit chat with. And I'll be putting some behind the scenes energy updates, channeled information, stuff like that in those. And then the higher level groups are more for people who are wanting to practice their intuition, develop, learn, and who are looking for people who want to do the same things. So if you have questions about those, feel free to reach out. My website is also linked in the show notes. And thank you guys so much for listening in on these episodes. There's also a link to my website where you can submit your stories to be shared in the listener submission episodes, where I will be including different podcast listeners who've submitted stories about ghostly events, visitations from loved ones, all sorts of messages they've gotten, intuitions they've had that helped them, synchronicities, manifestations, all of that fun stuff. So feel free to submit your stories there. And then if you have questions, or if you have certain things that you want to hear about on the podcast or have questions about, you can also pop those in at the link in the show notes. Thank you so much, guys.